So this is chapter 2, and it starts with an epigraph from Marguerite Duras. Very early in my life, it was too late. Mom and I went to live with her parents in Dormont, an older working-class borough of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. We shared the room she had shared with her sister while she was growing up. But now there was linoleum on the floor with Humpty Dumpty and the Three Little Pigs and other nursery rhymes represented. Mom had put it there for me. She bought bunk beds, matching dressers, and a desk. She had the dresser with the mirror covered with her makeup and perfume bottles, and I had the desk and the bedside table covered with my dolls. Mom's sister, Jean, was married, and she and her husband and 2 kids lived across the street in one of a row of small apartments. Uncle John still lived at home. My mother grew up in the latter part of the Depression. Her family, like most families, struggled to keep the bills paid. Mom says she knows she grew up poor, but doesn't remember feeling poor. There was food on the table and they owned their house. There just wasn't much extra and nothing was taken for granted. In many ways, my childhood was the same. Mom had to work and we had to live with Grandmom and Pop-Up. But when I wanted to go to camp or take tap dancing lessons, there was money. And there was money for a piano. At first, she was an accountant for a car dealer and then for the government. She worked for the Internal Revenue Service. I remember the coffee, cigarette, lipstick smell of her kiss before she raced for the bus each morning. I loved that smell. In the afternoon, I gathered up a few dolls and walked up the hill to the corner. There was a Lutheran church by the bus stop. I sat on the stone steps and played with my dolls, watching for the bus that brought my mom home from work, home to me. Our house was a small red brick house with an ivy-covered sloped yard in the front and a marble bird bath at the top. There was also a large maple tree beside concrete steps. The concrete gave way to blue wooden steps, which led to a blue wooden porch. I spent hours on those steps, trailing my fingers across the mix of rocks and the cement, picking ivy leaves apart at the vein and watching people and cars go by. I would move to the blue wooden steps and pick at the loose and peeling paint. In the back, Grandmom had a rose garden. There were lilac trees by the gate. In spring and summer, the air was redolent with the sweetness of flowers. I lay in the small patch of grass directly behind the house, trying to find 4-leaf clovers. There was an alley behind our house with houses behind us. It was a maze of bushes and vines. I huddled under arching branches and built elaborate worlds for my dolls with rocks and twigs. Every morning I sat at the end of Grandmom's bed, watching while she did her morning stretches. Her attitude about exercise was irreverent but consistent. She woke up, sat up, sort of touched her toes, sort of did arm circles, and then pronounced, "That's all you need." Looking at the antique pictures on her wall and on her dresser, I saw my claim to citizenship. There was an oval reproduction of a painting done by Archibald Willard, The Spirit of 76. In the painting, 3 men marched together through a Revolutionary War battlefield. The man in the middle has white hair. He and a younger man played drums. Think about that. Grandma pointed at the third, the one with the bandage around his head, who was playing the fife. That's Hugh Mosier, the cousin of your great-great-great-grandfather, Jeremiah Mosier Sample. He was a farmer in Massachusetts. He fought in the Civil War, so he was asked to pose for that painting. He played the fife the whole time he stood there. Willard made a cartoon drawing of the 3 while serving in the 86th Ohio Infantry during the Civil War. Years later, he showed it to an art dealer, James Ryder. Ryder thought that a more serious rendering and using a name that would recall an earlier American war might serve as a patriotic symbol for a nation struggling to see itself as one. The painting was a popular success, traveling from Boston to San Francisco. Critics pointed out that the Continental Congress didn't adopt the flag in the painting until 1777, but people lined up to see it, wept openly in front of it. Willard made 14 more copies of the same painting. Also on the dresser sat a daguerreotype of my great-great-great-grandfather, Jeremiah Mosier Sample, enshrined in a gold plate frame, which featured a ceramic eagle on top. Jeremiah was shot at Gettysburg. His wife, Sarah Sample, went to the battlefield to retrieve his body. Both her sons also died in the war. Sarah was a stalwart woman and an active member of the First Methodist Church. At 84, she sang "I Am a Pilgrim" at an anniversary meeting of the AIDS Society. Her picture in a smaller frame was nestled beside her husband's on the dresser. Jeremiah was the namesake of his grandfather, who had been enrolled in a company of the Minutemen at Roxbury, Massachusetts in 1776. He fought in the Battle of Concord, considered the first serious engagement of the American Revolution. This ancestral line means that I can be a daughter of the American Revolution, like my mother and her mother before her. The mission statement of the DAR says they were established in 1890 to perpetuate the memory and the spirit of men and women who achieved American independence. In 1939, they refused to allow Marian Anderson, the first African-American opera singer, to sing in Constitution Hall. FDR and Eleanor arranged for her to do an open-air concert on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial. Eleanor resigned from the DAR. Years later, possibly in an attempt to make amends, Marian Anderson was invited to sing in Constitution Hall by the DAR for a Red Cross benefit. I helped my grandmother attach her DAR pin to her collar on her Sunday dress, and believed that I would someday have one of my own. I learned to trust America as an institution and to see myself as its progeny. For my grandmother and my mother, this battle-bloodied family history wedded them to patriotic participation. It would be years before I would think about why Marian Anderson was not allowed to sing at Constitution Hall. Grandmom sat at the table in the morning, the paper spread out beside her toast and coffee, her glasses barely resting on the end of her tiny nose, reading every word, looking up occasionally to opine on current events. On the dining room wall behind her head hung commemorative plates featuring Lincoln, Roosevelt, Theodore, not Franklin Delano, Hoover, Eisenhower, and Nixon. She and my grandfather, who were disputatious about things like how well done his soft-boiled egg was, were given to hours of political conversation. During these talks, the contempt that he displayed for an overcooked yolk disappeared, and my grandfather's eyes glittered with affection and respect for my grandmother. Grandmom was a poll worker in every election. I remember sitting in a folding chair watching her while she sat in a red and white streamer-covered table, handing out ballots to neighbors. My mother was in the curtained booth, engaged in the mysterious process of voting. My grandfather stood outside, covered in buttons for the Republican candidates, talking jovially with people as they arrived. The Dormont I grew up in was increasingly blue-collar. There were more apartment buildings and fewer individually owned homes. The Moeds lived to the right of our house. Their house was a duplex. One family lived upstairs and the cousins lived downstairs. Each family had a child about my age, Joanne and Nikki. Grandmom and Pup-Pup seemed to disapprove of the Moeds, but I was never sure why. It may have had to do with the rock and rubbish-strewn terrace that was their front yard, held in place with cinder blocks. And Nikki's father could be heard yelling at his wife and son at all hours of the day and night. Nikki was a tough kid, and I was a little bit afraid of him. If he was playing with Joanne, I stayed on my porch and waited till he went inside. One afternoon, Joanne and I sat on the cinder blocks and tried to have a conversation. "You're going to hell." "I am not. I go to church." "You're not Catholic. You're going to hell." I ran to my grandmother crying. "I don't want to go to hell. Why can't we be Catholic?" Grandmom grabbed my hand and headed next door. Before we started up the steps, she took a bewildered Joanne by the arm. "Go and find your mother and bring her to the door." My grandmother vigorously explained to Joanne's wide-eyed mother that no matter what they believed, telling me I was going to hell was not acceptable. I don't remember the exact language she used, but I do remember thinking that if I went to hell, my grandmother would come and get me and the devil would not be able to stop her. The next time I saw Joanne, she was playing with Nikki. They shouted, "Fatty Patty," in a sing-song, jeering manner. Then she spun on her heels and went back in her house, and I went back into mine. Nikki just kept on playing. Secretly, I wanted to be a Catholic. They had great stuff, statues and beads and veils, and they had their own school, and they wore uniforms. My babysitter, Marilyn Eckhart, a beautiful girl with long blonde hair and translucent skin and blue eyes, lived to the left of our house. The Eckharts owned their house, but instead of brick, they had covered their house with white siding, a controversially modern choice. Despite their modern home decor and the fact that they were Catholic, our families were good friends. When I would go to the Eckhart's house, I would stare at the rosaries sitting on the table beside the bed. I was told not to play with them, that they were used in prayer. Surely praying that happened with beads was more effective than simply folding your hands. Marilyn, her mother Freddie, and I would line up in front of their black and white TV and watch the Mickey Mouse Club, each of us sporting the official mouse ear hats. Marilyn went into a convent when she graduated from high school. She came over to our house to tell me goodbye. I cried for hours. I wanted to go with her. I didn't understand why Methodists couldn't be nuns. I vowed to convert as soon as I was old enough. On Saturday afternoon, I watched old movies about pirates, movies with Shirley Temple, movies about cowboys and Indians. But my favorite movies were Our Lady of Fatima and Song of Bernadette. Both movies were about young girls who had visions of the Blessed Virgin Mary. Their names were Bernadette and Lucia. I wanted to be Lucia or Bernadette. I wanted to see a vision. No one would believe me. I would not deny my vision, and then I would be a saint. Marilyn and Freddie were fun to play with, but they were older and didn't always want me around. Joanne and Nikki were scary. Cheryl Taylor lived 4 houses down from us, but my mother didn't like me to play with her because she didn't wear socks. From this, my mother concluded that she was not well parented. But I got tired of endless hours playing alone. I wandered down the block and sat on the steps in front of the Taylor house. Not only did Cheryl wear shoes with no socks, her shoes were black with pointy toes, very modern, and she had a collection of different troll dolls and bubble rings. I wore saddle shoes, ankle socks, and my mother thought that troll dolls were ugly. She was a single working mother living with her parents. She didn't spend money easily. Troll dolls were not a priority. I watched Cheryl brush the long orange hair on her troll doll, a yellow bubble ring on her finger, and her nails painted hot pink. She was so cool. Cheryl convinced me to walk to the Five and Dime. We wandered through the store, flipped through comic books, stared into the front of the candy case. Even the rows of hammers, wrenches, and screwdrivers seemed fascinating. We wandered into the aisle with the makeup, rows of lipstick, mascara, eyelash curlers, and bottles of nail polish, shiny with the promise of beauty. Cheryl picked up a bottle of pink nail polish and handed it to me. "Just put it in your pocket," Cheryl whispered. "I can't, I'm scared. Come on, I do it all the time." That night when my mother got off the bus, I was standing at the stop waiting for her, but I wasn't playing with my dolls. Clutched in my hand was the bottle of nail polish. My cheeks were tear-stained and I was trembling. I would not answer her questions about why I went so far from the house or who I was with or if I had been convinced to perpetrate this crime. I just wanted her to tell me how to give the nail polish back. She took me to the Five and Dime and we found the manager. After I confessed my crime and returned the goods, my mother and I walked home in silence. She didn't say much while we ate dinner. Grandmom and Pop-Up didn't say much either. I picked at my pork chop. Later, as she tucked me in, she said, "You know I don't want you to wear nail polish until you're older, don't you?" "Yes." She kissed me goodnight. "It was very brave of you to face the store manager, and I was very proud of you." I loved my mother so much. I vowed to never play with Cheryl. That was chapter 2.